Okay. Well, I'm continuing the talks on the ox herding pictures, the stages of Zen practices depicted by the ox herding pictures. And today is the fifth stage, which is called Taming the Ox. If you remember, the ox is our true self or true nature. And in the last episode, the herdsman actually captured the ox. In other words, he saw his own face. So the herdsman really caught the ox at the preceding stage, but he may be attached to him precisely because of this. So to undo this attachment and to be able to liberate himself from the ox, he must tame him. Here, the training after breakthrough begins, which consists in bringing the ox and ourselves to one pure whole in all coming and going and in all circumstances of daily life. At the same time, taming means letting go of ourself and beings, letting go of ourself and beings come to pure unity, in which the self sinks into beings and vice versa. As the old masters say, it's extremely difficult to let this unity always persist. The breakthrough must, of course, be sudden and instantaneous, but the training afterwards to allow what has been won to constantly persist has to be gradual. So I don't know if you heard, there were arguments between the sudden and the gradual school in the history of Buddhism, and for me, this clarifies that whatever awakening we have or insight is always sudden, but to integrate it into our life is a gradual process. But if even the slightest thought arises, then another inexorably follows it in an endless round. Through awakening, everything becomes truth. Through blindness, it becomes error. Thoughts arise not from the surroundings, but out of the herdsman's own mind. Hold the rein tight and do not allow yourself to waver. So once you've reached stage 4, the point of catching the ox, which I said is the true self, you must not rest on your laurels, but continue to practice with all your conviction and go on to the next stage. It is the stage of taming the ox, a very important process by which you make your own that which has been realized. So, seizing the ox, as I mentioned, is grasping clearly the fact that the essence of yourself is empty. And at the same time, all things in the universe are completely empty. But to have attained such an enlightenment does not mean that our concepts and delusions automatically all disappear. With the reappearance of just a minor conceptualization, the delusive concepts come roaring back again, one after another, without end. In fact, it's the case that the clearer your experience of seeing the ox, the harder it is to escape the delusion of having understood the whole world and to avoid the proud thoughts which arise one after another. You boast of the experience, talk proudly of Zen, and fall prey to the reckless desire to want to direct and lead others. We call this the stink of Zen. Once you've had an awakening experience, we boast that no one has had such a wonderful experience. We cling to the delusive and proud thoughts that arise one after another, such as, well, perhaps Shakyamuni Buddha himself did not have such an experience as I. And these thoughts themselves become a new source of delusion. So I'm going to tell two stories about famous masters Rinzai and Hakuin and how they fell into this trap. Zen master Rinzai studied 3 years with Obaku. Before he went to see him, he was in the monastery 3 years. He didn't even go to Doksan once. And he only went at the insistence of the head monk, whose name was Bokshu, who told, and Rinzai says, I don't know what to ask him. And he says, ask him what's the true meaning of Zen. And so Rinzai went in and asked Obaku, what is the true meaning of Zen? And Obaku hit him with a stick. And he came back and told Bokshu what happened. He said, well, go back again and ask him. And he did it 3 times, and the same thing happened. And then he decided that he had bad karma. So Rinzai decided to leave because he wasn't learning anything. And so Obaku sent him to another teacher named Daigu. And Rinzai went to Daigu and he told him his sad story of what happened. And Daigu said, Obaku treated you with the compassionate heart of a grandmother bent on releasing you from your bondage and distress, and yet you come here and ask me whether you're at fault. So hearing that, Rinzai had an awakening experience. And he said, there's not so much to the Zen of Obaku. And Daigu grabbed him and said, you bedwetting imp. A moment ago, you were asking me if you were at fault, and you say now that there's not much to Obaku. What truth do you see? Speak right now. And Rinzai punched Daigu under the ribs 3 times. And Daigu released him and said, after all, your teacher is Obaku, not me. Why should I get involved? And he released him. And Rinzai went back to Obaku and became his successor, but first he had to tone down his arrogance, and suddenly he thought he was at fault, and then he said, that's not much, I got it all, I understand everything. So, as you know, Rinzai became quite famous. He's the founder of the Rinzai school, which still exists today. And he was supposed to have been a vigorous teacher. He had a loud shout. He would yell at his students, and he used his stick a lot. So he learned from Obaku. That's the true meaning of Zen right there. Bam. So let me tell you about Master Hakuin, who is credited in the 18th century of revitalizing Rinzai Zen in Japan. It was becoming kind of distorted. Maybe you heard there were stories of senior monks selling answers to koans to junior monks. So Hakuin was a very prolific writer about his own journey and his own experience. And he narrated this part of his life when he had deep awakening experiences. It goes like this. This is out of his journals. He said, the spring of my 24th year found me in the monks' quarters of Eiganji in Echigo, pursuing my strenuous studies. Night and day I did not sleep. I forgot both to eat and rest. Suddenly a great doubt manifested itself before me. It was as though I were frozen solid in the midst of an ice sheet extending tens of thousands of miles. A purity filled my breast, and I could neither go forward nor retreat. To all intents and purposes, I was out of my mind, and the mu alone remained. Although I sat in the lecture hall and listened to the master's lecture, it was as though I were hearing a discussion from the distance outside the hall. At times it felt as if I were floating in the air. The state lasted for several days. Then I chanced to hear the sound of the temple bell, and I was suddenly transformed. It was as if a sheet of ice had been smashed and a jade tower had fallen with a crash. Suddenly, I returned to my senses. I felt then that I had achieved the status of Ganto, who through the 3 periods of time encountered not the slightest loss. All of my former doubts vanished, as though ice had melted away. In a loud voice, I called, "Wonderful, wonderful. There is no cycle of birth and death through which one must pass. There is no enlightenment one must seek. The 1700 koans handed down from the past have not the slightest value whatsoever." My pride soared up like a majestic mountain. My arrogance surged forward like the tide. Smugly, I thought to myself, in the past 200 or 300 years, no one could have accomplished such a marvelous breakthrough as this. Shouldering my glorious enlightenment, I set out at once for Shinano, calling on Master Shoju. I told him of my experience and presented him with a verse. The master, holding my verse up in the left hand, said to me, "This verse is what you've learned from study. Now show me what your intuition has to say." And he held out his right hand. I replied, "If there was something intuitive that I could show you, I'd vomit it out," and I made a gagging sound. And the master said, "How do you understand Joshu's mu?" And I replied, "What sort of place does mu have that one can attach arms and legs to it?" The master twisted my nose with his fingers and said, "Here's some place to attach arms and legs." I was nonplussed, and the master gave a hearty laugh. "You poor hole-dwelling devil," he cried. I paid him no attention, and he continued, "Do you think somehow that you have sufficient understanding?" I answered, "What do you think is missing?" From then on, almost every time he saw me, he would call me a poor, hole-dwelling devil. After I devoted myself to intense study of the koan, not pausing to sleep or eat, one day I had an awakening. I went to the master's room to test my understanding. He would not approve it. All he did was call me a poor, hole-dwelling devil. I began to think that I'd better leave and go someplace else. One day when I had gone to town to beg for food, I encountered a mad woman who beat me unconscious with a broom. Unexpectedly, when I awakened, I found that I had penetrated the koan. Then the other koans that had puzzled me fell into place of themselves, and I penetrated them all. After I returned to the temple, I spoke of the understanding I had gained. The master neither approved nor denied what I said, but only laughed pleasantly. From that time on, he stopped calling me a poor, hole-dwelling devil. So after an awakening experience, you should ask, what is the essence of these delusive and discriminatory thoughts that arise continually? They're in themselves totally empty and without reality. If you can really rest assured in the fact, each of them, one by one, becomes the true self as it is. But we humans, unfortunately, always cling to what we have experienced and have the habit of not letting go. Some of you have commented to me that you can sit still and have wonderful experiences, and other times you struggle. So the answer is to keep letting go. Don't cling to anything. This is especially true in the case of the seizing of the ox, a feat that most people have a difficult time achieving. But once we have made it, we boast that no one has had such a wonderful experience. We cling to the delusive and proud thoughts that arise one after another. And these thoughts become a new reason for delusion. There arises in the mind the idea of I, which has experienced seizing the ox. So the world corresponds to that I, with the result that the objective world is conjured up by this proud I. In the true world of seizing the ox, the objective world as well as the subjective world is totally empty. There's no room for being and non-being. To be always at rest securely in such a world, it's necessary by all means to put the halter through the nose of the ox and pull it firmly. If the ox starts to eat grass, the grass of discriminatory delusion, tell him, no. Never neglect the due training and continue in hard practice to the end. There's a koan case in the Mumonkan where Master Zuigan called to himself every day. He said, "Master, are you in?" And he would answer himself, "Yes, I'm in." Then he'd say, "Do not be deceived by others." And then he would tell himself, "No, I will not." Every day he would talk to himself, reassuring himself, cautioning himself to not be deceived by others. And the others could just be the thoughts in his own mind. This is the practice of post-enlightenment. And you must say that in a sense, it is endless. And Hakuin said that it's more difficult than pre-enlightenment practice. So from the point of view of primary truth, there's no Buddha above and no beings below. So awakening and non-awakening, gain and loss do not occur. But we can't stand in that region of ultimate reality either. So there's no realization without reality, and no reality without realization. Without the world of absolute, there's no world of relative. Without unity, there's no differences, and vice versa. So as long as we see either beings or our original nature, we can never succeed in entering the world of truth. So the world of truth will only open when beings in our true nature have entirely become one. In Zen, this is what we call the region of great death. When the student gets to the bottom of a koan, there's neither koan nor the searching self, but at the same time, there's both of them. This is where the koan and self become one, beyond affirmation and negation. If the student has succeeded in getting there, he will not be driven around anymore by beings. The world of the various phenomena now comes out of the original self. It's not separate. And there's a verse for this stage. It goes like this: the herdsman must not for a moment drop whip or rein, or else the ox will stampede into the dust. But if the ox is patiently tamed and gentled, he will follow the herdsman by himself without fetter or chain. So the herdsman must not for a moment drop whip or rein. The whip or rein could be anything that supports your practice. It could be the koan that you're working on. It could be the persistent irritation in your life. It could be your practice of the precepts or the paramitas. And it could be your zazen practice. So as to all of this, take heed. Don't wobble. Or else the ox will stampede into the dust. This is not a threat, it's a promise. But if the ox is patiently tamed and gentled, so patience is one of the paramitas. I talked about it during Shishin. When we're patient, we don't get irritated or discouraged. Sometimes things happen quickly and sometimes they take a long time. But be steady. Like the song Old Man River, you just keep rolling along. And the last line says, he will follow the herdsman by himself without a fetter or chain. You will be turned by the ox while simultaneously turning the ox. There'll be no separation between you and your true self, between your true self and you. So that's what it means in this fifth stage to tame the ox. Yeah, sounds pretty profound. It's only the fifth stage. So where are we going to go from here? Well, I guess we'll have to pick this up in 3 weeks. Huh? Okay. Okay, well, that's all I have to say.